This is the FRC Roundtable, coming to you all the way from Minnesota. Your host team 2052 Nightcrawler presents this weekly FRC gathering where FIRST Robotics competition teams take cooperation off the field. Share your knowledge, give and get advice, solve a challenge, or celebrate what makes your team special. 3, 2, 1, go!
Them afterwards.
Okay, recording has been started. So we have a pretty good crowd here. I think we can go ahead and get started. Our topic tonight is the design process. So this came out of a question that Jeremiah asked. I'm sure he'll pop in here at some point, but if not, he'll always be on the replay. But I've worked a lot with Jeremiah's team. So for those of you who don't know, Jeremiah is on the Ashby team. Does anybody remember their number? Is it 8878? Out of Ashby, Minnesota. They were a rookie team last year, and they were next to us at 10K. They came to the event with a completed robot, but had not even installed WPI Lib on a laptop. They had no code, had never driven the robot or anything. And so we worked with them in their pit for 10K, and we got them out on drive. And oh, there he is right there. And then at the end of the event, they had scored one of their matches. They'd scored 7 balls. They even had a 2-ball auto by the end of the event. It was really good. And then so Jeremiah, I worked with him this year as well with their robot. They struggle with their arm. And so Jeremiah, if that was you, the Aerobot's on the call, feel free to share some of the things you're hoping to get out of this call. Otherwise, what I'm really interested to hear about is how people analyze the game, how they come up with their design, how many students are involved, how they stick to that plan. Do they do multiple different prototypes? At what point do you decide we're building this and you move forward? Just anything anyone wants to share about how their team organizes their build season from start to finish. So does anybody want to go first?
Sure, I'd be willing to share, I guess. I think one of the things, so 2847 Fairmont, I think something that we've done kind of particularly well or honed in on is before kickoff, setting your team's like competitive goals. So saying, we want to be top 8, we want to be top 16, we want to be a pick, we want to be a second pick, we want to be rank 1, and letting your game analysis be driven from that. And so, especially like in the years where we were kind of building up, so like, we've kind of got to the point now where we say we want to be rank 1, but you know, like 2019, 2020, we were kind of saying, what do we need to do to be top 8 or top 16 or be a first pick? And really when we're analyzing the game, kind of saying that feature, we don't need that. Unless we're trying to rank 1, we don't need that. And we're not trying to rank 1. So the 2019 is a great one. So some of the students might have to do a little history deep dive, but filling that rocket. And we said, we're not trying to be rank 1, so we don't need to fill the rocket. We're not going to try that, you know? And really, once you say you're not doing that, your whole build season just got way, way easier. And so trying to find those sweet spots where you say, we don't actually need that to reach our goals. And then also being disciplined about that going forward. And every time someone suggests a robot idea saying, well, it'd be really nice because actually if we did this, we could also fill the rocket, saying, well, maybe, we already agreed we're not going to. Let's keep that scaling down. And that's a kind of a discipline thing and a team values thing you have to kind of work on. I guess that's kind of something we found. So,
yeah, that's kind of what our team does. To at least this year, we've been trying to build within our limits more. Where at the beginning of the season, we're like, so what's our goal for the season? And if I remember correctly, it was get picked at both of our regionals and qualify for the state championship. So, obviously, if your goal is to qualify for Worlds in Texas, that means to consistently do that, you have to probably be, 1 or 2 at your regional, which is, a little, for our team this year was unrealistic of a goal. So instead we were like, this is a goal that we think, we can achieve, but, it's not guaranteed or like super easy to achieve. But if we had a good season, that's probably where we'd be. And so we then made the rest of our strategy decisions based on that. So we're looking at, we wanted to be, to get to state, you have to be picked, and then you have to be probably in the top 4 alliances, in your first regional, which meant that we wanted to have a working robot in week 1 for a week 1 competition. And we wanted it to be robust and be able to contribute in a way that would help whatever alliance we ended up on. And so that kind of informed our decisions to eventually deciding to be a low goal robot this year.
I really like what you said there, Ian, too, about at the beginning kind of being honest about like where your team's resources are at, where you're at historically and knowledge-wise. I think takes a big bit of humble to say, this year we're probably not building a rank 1 robot, whether it's resources, money, mentor talent, student experience, something like that. And so I think that's a hard thing a lot of teams get hung up on, kind of, is saying, I don't know, even if you had a good year the previous year, coming forward and saying, okay, I know we ranked 7th last year. Are we still actually set up to shoot higher this year? And you see it with a lot of the robots that don't do so hot, that are ranked in the 40s and stuff, but they clearly had a design or an architecture that was trying to shoot for number 1. I think a lot of teams get caught up in that.
Yeah, and I think that happened to us to some extent in 2022, where we had a high goal robot that had a turret on it, but in the whole process of that, we ran out of time to put on our climber, and the high goal with the turret wasn't shooting consistently until by the week 6 regional we had, but by then you also had to be able to climb to get picked, so we just we didn't end up on an alliance that season, and so it was kind of like coming out of that where we were like, let's try and build more within our limits. Although I also think in some respects that pick and place games make it easier to build within. I guess pick and place games, in my opinion, have a lower skill floor, because with a lot of pick and place games, at least the ones we've seen recently, because there's limited high opportunities, right? Like, for example, in this game, all of the high pieces are going to be filled out no matter what. In 2019, the Rockets, a majority of the game pieces were low, or in 2018, where, the scale was the only high objective there, where you have to focus on some of the low aspects to win, as opposed to 2020 and 2022, where you can just shoot as many game pieces into the high goals as you can, and you can score as much as you want in the high goals. So it makes no sense to have a low goal specialist on your team. But I think that this game kind of led itself to being conducive to allowing simple robots.
I would really agree with that point. And I haven't looked at a lot of other regionals, but we were at 10,000 Lakes week 5. And compared to last year, which was my first year going to regionals, the volatility in rankings near the end, I think, really reflects just the way that strategy plays into Charged Up much more than it did Rapid React, kind of with what you were saying about, if last year, if you couldn't score high and if you couldn't, climb pretty well, then there wasn't a lot that your team could do. But in this game, there's a lot of different kind of levels that a robot can be at and still be very successful.
So I got a question here. Would it be beneficial for next season or future seasons, let's say, with these roundtables, to early on kind of like, hey, this is what we see in this game, and these are some of the areas where low budget team, low resource team, you can be able to have a successful season, by probably taking such a route, just because this is a great conversation as a lesson learned. But how do we do that and apply it to future seasons,
Yeah, Jeremiah, I think that's a great idea. I think there's a lot of knowledge of people on this call who have been through a lot of seasons, and a lot of people from some of these, maybe the teams who are building, top regional winning robots, but they see kind of those sweet spots where it's like, if I was advising a middle tier team or a rookie team, here's where you should go. I think, of course, the EveryBot resource is a great, kind of checkpoint too. But I really like that idea.
I agree. I'm thinking back now of when we first looked at the game. We knew at 10K for sure. And Lexi, you're a strategy. Well, not a strategy captain, but you're deep into the strategy because you do the picks. But I know that we had these conversations of, we want to pick a robot for our third robot that is fast and low to the ground, or so can't tip over and can go over the charging station. And we knew that we wanted that type of robot. But I'm thinking back to when we were doing game analysis. I don't know that we knew what we wanted to do, but I don't know that we knew at that time that a low, fast robot was the right choice for our third pick. It would be an interesting exercise to do that as a group of what do we think is going to be the best robot a low resource team can build so that they can get on a good alliance for playoffs. You mentioned the EveryBot. I think the EveryBot historically is a fantastic resource for low resource teams, whether that's money or students. But this year's EveryBot, they competed okay, and there were several EveryBots that did okay, but I don't know.
They were just heavy on top, and
they were tippy, yeah, and they weren't very fast because they were tippy. And I think that was I don't know. I know that the folks that do the EveryBot, they want to try to build a bot that can do all the good things. But this was a tough game for an EveryBot.
Because I thought, with the EveryBot, there were elements of it that could be taken out of it and utilized uniquely for a team. But if you have to build the whole thing as they specified out,
There's. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, John.
I was going to say, didn't Jesse? You guys built the boys team built one, didn't they?
Yeah, the boys team built an EveryBot, and we had a bunch of new kids on the team, so that's kind of why we went that route. We really only had one returning build student, so it's filled in with a lot of younger kids and even some middle school students. So we didn't want to go. We wanted a template for them, and the documentation on that thing is ridiculous. Like, seriously, and the videos that they put in with First in Michigan was. You almost didn't have to watch them a little bit, at least at times. But yeah, our drivers were pretty new over in Grand Forks, and we struggled a bit over there. But when we got out to Idaho, they had kind of gotten the feel for it, and they were doing 5 or 6 pieces a match towards the end, which is pretty good for an Andy Mark chassis and a template like that. But that's exactly why we decided to do that with that group, is because we had kids that couldn't walk over to the toolbox and hand you a 1/8 Allen wrench. Like, they didn't know what that was. So we started out with something pretty simple with that group. And there was really, that thing is designed so it doesn't have to be machined at all, although we did machine a few pieces manually or CNC-wise. But because I didn't think we were going to hit that learning curve with those kids within a season. So, but see what happens next year with the group. The girls' team was more advanced this year, and we still copied a template, the West Coast Products one, but we did some modifications to that. And that wasn't any easier than trying to come up with our own design, I think, because there was a lot of stuff going on that machine.
But just beyond the EveryBot, you have there's about 8 or 9 pretty good our Robot in 3-Day teams too, that you can see a lot of videos by Tuesday, Wednesday of the first week and get a lot of ideas.
So John, if I remember, you start out you're focusing on cycle time. What can we do to design a robot to have the highest cycle time? Am I wrong there?
Yeah, we're basically saying, you got 100 you got about 110, 20 seconds to run cycles. So if you can get down to 12 seconds, you can get 10 cycles. So that was kind of what we were talking about, is how do you go as fast as possible. But I think we got a little complex up in Duluth and didn't really quite get it finished. So by 10K, we had basically rebuilt the robot. So
Michael, go ahead.
One of the things I watched our team struggle with was there was a lot of great ideas about how to play the game this year. And one thing I'm really impressed with, look at the Nightcrawler's robot, is you came out with an idea that was very competitive and robust and could handle sort of the difficulties of the game. And I'm curious how you go from, okay, we have 3 great ideas, all of which would be competitively viable, all of which are buildable. How does that discussion flow from those ideas to, okay, here's the idea we're going to do, because we got to choose one?
Well, I do so much talking on these calls. Does anyone else from Nightcrawler want to share the changes that we made this year to how we ran the team starting way back in the fall? I mean, I'm happy to do it, but I feel like I do too much talking on these calls. No, nobody wants to. Okay. So, we participated in what was Turtle Trials, is now is called The Test, in the fall. That somebody on this call must be part of organizing the test, right? Does anyone want to get a little blurb of what the test is?
I've been pitching the test to a bunch of teams, so I can. I'm
do it,
not
Ian.
Involved with it, but I think it's a really good concept. So basically, and if somebody could link the Chief Delphi post from this year's season, so they could see the example while I'm explaining that, that'd be great. So basically, the test is a mock season, but on a smaller scale. So it's 2v2. It's like a square field in the off season. So they reveal the game in early October. So you can kind of fit it in with however your off season, is designed. So if you don't meet until later and you want to do a condensed build season, or if you want to meet twice a week all the way, through. I think we did our kickoff for it, which replaced our mock kickoff this year I think 2 weeks after the game was revealed. And so we kind of did, the entire process of, we did our strategy. We looked at what we thought we'd want to do, all of those things. And then it's kind of a mock season, but in the off season specifically dedicated towards learning. And so the price cap of the robots is, I think, $1,000 if you use a kit base, $1,600 if you don't use a kit base. So we didn't spend any extra money on the entire thing. We just, put together a kit base we had, and, using what we had in our robotics lab, we kind of just, built a robot based off of that. And then after that, the first or second weekend of December, they have a competition. They try to keep it to 12 or under teams. And if they have more than 12 teams this year, they're going to try and split it into 2 days. So that kind of gives you as much match time as possible. And so then you have a couple, it's basically a regional condensed into 1 day almost, because you have 2 practice matches. Then you do a bunch of qualification matches. And then at the end, they have a playoffs bracket with 4 teams of 2 in double elimination. And it's a lot of fun. I have gone on record to say that at the test has been one of my favorite competition experiences I've had. I'm someone who's more into the building aspect of robotics than the competing aspect, full disclosure. I'm not, but it was just, I liked it a lot because it was just very relaxed, and it was more of a celebration of the off season rather than competition. You have to win this match or you're going home. It was more of let's see how our robot did. Our robot didn't do too great at the competition. It started the day as a high goal robot and ended the day as a low goal robot. But in the end, it was still a lot of fun. So yeah.
Okay, that was excellent. Thank you for that, Ian. Oh, Lexi, did you want to add something to the test?
Oh, I was just going to talk about, I think from a student perspective on our team, what tests improved for the preseason and in terms of like training and stuff and the design process.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So something that we ran into last year, and I assume we had probably run into years before during build season, is that, you know, as part of FRC, we want to give students the experience of prototyping, right? And like failing and having to iterate. But doing that within the 6 weeks of build season is not always viable when we know that there are ideas that are not going to work. But providing that prototyping and like design process experience is really important. And so on the leadership side, we looked at test as a way to train new students in and also get new students directly working on robots. I think that was something that was kind of always like about commitment night, was the fact that students would go, you know, 3 months without actually touching robots before build season. And so new students would get into, you know, using robots immediately. And also, you know, this was where it was, you know, instead of using cardboard and stuff like that during build season, you know, people were building their cardboard prototypes. And I think some of them actually did a little bit of CAD in the preseason for, you know, their turtle test robots. And even though, you know, we were trying to write code the night before for our turtle test robots, that kind of put the like fear of the deadline into some of our new students as well, which I think normally it takes students, you know, a whole build season to get that. And so when we went into the charged up season, it was like, oh, you know, they have already had this experience of like understanding things are going to take way longer than you think they are. And so for us, the test was very helpful in, you know, giving students the ability to have the prototyping experience, but also realizing the importance of executive decisions and saying like, no, this is the direction that we're going in because we can't spend time like waffling between ideas.
Yeah, and I kind of want to add on to, because I kind of forgot to say, the effects it had on our team. So like historically, our team, the first year, people are there. They're kind of like, especially at kickoff, they're like in the background watching what's going on instead of making direct inputs. And having basically, you have an entire, all the rookies have, and our team is a very high new student portion this year. You know, all of the rookies on your team basically have an entire season under their belts come kickoff. And I thought that it gave a voice to a lot of our younger students, which normally, we don't see that happen. And from that perspective, like we probably, I think it ended up being a good thing because I was pushing our team to do high goal at the start of the season, which I think it was the right decision to end up going low goal, but that was led a lot by a lot of the newer students who watched how our test season went and was like, and, you know, thought that we'd see a lot more success as a low goal robot. And I think that, you know, it was definitely the right decision to help their strategy. And I know from a code perspective, our test robot was 100% coded by new students. And basically our entire robot in the on season was also coded by new students. This year I helped them out with a little bit of the debugging and the autos as code lead. But that was really cool to see, to give a purpose to the code training where we're not just driving or not just coding basic, you know, kit drive code that's never going to be used. We're coding something that's going to be used in a competition.
So I may have pushed the hardest for our team to participate in the test, and that was somewhat of a selfish reason. As a programming mentor, we're way better than we used to be. Nate shared with me that the first year Nightcrawler had a competition, they stayed up all night and started writing code at like midnight, and we're writing code in the parking lot while they were waiting to load in. and they had less than 24 hours to write the code. Today, we're much better than that. But one of the things that Nightcrawler has figured out over the years is that you want to come out of auto with the lead. And that doesn't happen if you only have 4 days to work on code on the robot, or even a week to work on code on the robot. And so we start thinking about, how can we get the robot to the programmers sooner? And really the only thing that you can sort of condense down in that build season is that prototyping phase. And so looking at tests, we put a lot of emphasis on that design process. We want kids, exactly like Lexi said, we want them to brainstorm crazy ideas. We want them to fail through that process. But the problem we were having is that we wanted that not to happen in that 6 weeks. We wanted that to happen before that 6 weeks. We wanted them to experience that design process and that failure, and that, oh, now I see why things didn't work the way I thought they would work. And Turtle Test or Turtle Trials or the test, that gave us that opportunity to give them that experience without negatively impacting our build season. So for everything everyone else said about the test, I feel like it took a big chunk of our build season, which is super important, and it let us do that in the fall, and it let us move that out of the build season, which condensed our schedule, which gave our programmers more time with the robot. Ian had mentioned earlier that in 2019 or 2022, you guys wanted to score high, but you were struggling with accuracy. I suspect part of that might have been you didn't have as much time with the programmers to work on tuning the robot, right? And so if you would have had more time writing code, you would have performed better. So we've been putting big
made 15 minutes. In a span of 15 minutes, it was completely rewritten before our week 0 competition. And it's why if you go into our GitHub repo, the name of our final code is Infinite Recharge 2022 imported 2020 imported real.
So we've been trying really hard to get, we've always said the programmers need the bot for the last week, and that almost has never happened before. I think it did happen this week. We actually ended up restructuring some of our season this year, so the programmers actually got part of the robot and got to start using it, I think, at the end of week 4. Then Bill took it back during week 5, and then programmers got it again in week 6. So we were able to do some shuffling around this year, but it was the most time that programmers had ever gotten the robot this year, and I contribute a lot of that to, we got rid of that sort of brainstorming, and we've always made things out of cardboard in the past, at least since I've been on the team. And this year we said no cardboard. Cardboard was for Turtle Test. We're doing CAD and plywood. So real physical designs or CAD first. So that was a big change for our team this year, is that we wanted to try to push that ideation out of the build season and put that into the fall under the test. The other thing that we did, and Michael alluded to this earlier with this concept of this institutional knowledge, how do you share this institutional knowledge? The captains and the mentors had, after we got done with the test, we started doing some design stuff. So we have always had a subset of the team participate called the design team that designs the robot during build season. But we pulled some of those students together in the fall and said, hey, let's try to establish some design doctrine. I don't know a better word for that. But the veterans on the team and the mentors who've been in the team for a while, we said, how do we help students build the things that we know are going to work now that we've let them have this failure experience in the fall? How do we shortcut some of this stuff during the design season? So we set up sort of some design principles, and they were pretty basic. One of them was we had success with Swerve. We're always going to use Swerve going forward unless we have to jump over stuff. And everyone looked around the room and said, yeah, for sure. Why would we do anything else? We figured out how to do Swerve. Why would we go back? So that was one, so there's no more decisions to be made on what's the best drivetrain for this game. We've just decided we're going to start building that Swerve chassis right away. And we might have to change the size later, but we can start putting that Swerve chassis together week 1. Another design principle that we decided with is we pick up things with wheels. So we always have a wheel intake. We weren't going to do a claw mechanism. We've long had this sort of informal kind of principle on Nightcrawlers, touch it, own it. So the only way you touch it, own it typically is if you suck it in with wheels and it gets into some type of an intake and it's yours. And so we shared that with the team. A little side story. We went back to the team and said, here's what did we learn from Turtle Test? And here's some design principles that we're going to try to stick to for the build season. And we said this whole concept of we pick things up with wheels. And one of our students was like, why didn't you tell us that for turtle? We could have done so much better at turtle test if you would have just told us that we should try to pick things up with wheels. We would have tried these other things. And we're like, but that's the point, right? The point is that you guys should come up with all these crazy brainstorms and come up with a design of your own. What other? Oh, we have a sort of softer type of requirement that linear actuation is easier than rotational. So that's why our robot has an elevator this year rather than an arm with a pivot, is because it takes more torque. It's, you can have, it's a little bit harder to control something that might be popping around on an arm versus something that's in and out in an elevator. So we decided that we should try an elevator first, if that becomes an option rather than an arm. We're a team that has historically used a lot of pneumatics. And so another design principle we had is if you can do something in two positions, then we should see if we can do it with pneumatics rather than using a motor to rotate something. And so we try to simplify designs around using pistons rather than using motors and controlling a encoder or something like that with a PID loop. So we set sort of those institutional knowledge of here's what historically has worked well for our team. Here's what we're good at. Let's make this sort of the core, not necessarily a rule, I would say, but more of a guideline of when we're looking at designs, let's try to incorporate this institutional knowledge of what our seniors and what our mentors know work well into any design that goes forward. And so that really helped narrow the focus for our students that were on the design team. And they really started coming in on I don't even think we had 3 different options for anything this year. I think we could do this or we could do this. And our students really focused in early, and that got us to a decision much quicker than in previous years when we try a whole bunch of different things.
Yeah. The other thing this year is right after kickoff, we did our human simulation, but we also had students do a ton of research. So design team went and identified, here are kind of all the different tasks that might be done. And then it was, split up in the jigsaw method of students, going through and look at FTC games, look at Robot in 3 days, learn from others before we try things ourselves, right? Try and identify strengths and weaknesses of different designs before, we're doing them in plywood, because that's going to save us time as well.
So, question: you guys been talking about this test robots competition thing? I think, Scott, you must have mentioned something like that back in the fall, but then it went over my head. Is that something that based on the current game or what you think the future game is? Maybe you guys addressed that and I missed that. I'm sorry if I did.
I talked to Jason Herzog about tests quite a bit at both North Star and 10K Lakes. And so he's one of the designers. I think it's a couple other people, a couple of the mentors from No Mythic. I think Charles and Kelly also do it. But from what I heard, basically they design the game off of what they predict the next year's game is going to be. So, for example, this year they were like, there hasn't been a pick and place game since 2019, so it's probably going to be a pick and place game. So they designed and created a pick and place game that had, 2 different game elements that you had to be able to pick up. And then, it got us thinking the right way because it was, similar. You had to basically tape together pool noodles onto posts, which in some ways got us a lot of thinking about, I know at kickoff when we were thinking about how cones would go into the posts, we were thinking about how, things had to be placed, how it was easier or harder to place some posts depending on different things during test.
I think another aspect of the test was that they try to use game pieces from the previous year or game pieces that are easily available. So, my guess is that next year there's a good chance that we'll see traffic cones as part of the test. I don't know how many of the inflatable cubes will survive, but traffic cones are sort of easy to get, and if you've got them, you probably aren't going to lose them, unless your driver's ed teacher takes them all away from you or something. But yeah, I suspect next year there'll be traffic cones as part of the game, but like Ian said, they'll probably try to guess that, okay, there probably won't be back-to-back pick-and-place games, so how can we incorporate a traffic cone into this new game we're going to design? I will say that game was amazing. It had so much strategy involved. It did not feel like a scaled up FTC game. It felt like a game that easily could be an FRC game if there was just slightly harder components added to the game. They did. The folks that designed that game did such an excellent job.
Yeah, the game was designed really. I think that in some ways it's been my favorite strategic robotics game that at least in allowing room for upsets with strategy and things like that. I may be a little biased because there's 4 alliances and there was no snake draft to even them out. And as part of the 4 seed alliance, we were able to upset into a win based on, I think that our robots were outputting less game pieces per match, but it allowed us we were able to win because we had a concrete strategy of we're going to make links here and we're going to make sure we break up their links over there. And then that would allow us to, I think we won by, a large margin in almost all of our matches.
Yeah, it was a very, very well designed game, very well balanced. It was good. They did a great job.
So how much is that to participate? Do you know?
I believe it was, you could submit up to 3 robots. I think it was $75 for the first robot, $50 for the second, and $25 for the third. And if you missed it earlier, you either could use the kit apart chassis and then spend up to $1,000 on everything else that was on your robot, or you could spend $1,600 total if you used a different type of chassis. And you also, if you already had a chassis put together, it wasn't like normal FRC where you had to tear it all apart. You could just start building right on top of it. You could use, if you had stuff that was already sort of assembled that would work for you, you could use the parts you already had assembled.
Yeah, a lot of things are simplified, so you can reuse parts. They don't force you to start inside your frame perimeter, so you don't have to worry about how are we going to make sure this starts, within our frame. You don't need bumpers, so it takes out a lot of it really boils it down to, this is what is important in FRC.
The other thing that the approach that Nightcrawler took, and I think this is sort of the recommended approach as well, is that we wanted new kids who had never done anything with the robot to do pretty much everything on the robot. We wanted them to do the construction, the design, the build. We took our veteran kids and sort of had them act like the captains, where they were teaching and training and guiding. And then we had our captains act like the mentors, where they were, again, sort of guiding, but really more hands off. And then our mentors just made sure nobody got hurt. And that was sort of the way that we structured it. We just took everybody and we elevated them sort of up a role with the goal of getting brand new students to do most of the work on the robot.
Yeah, and I know one thing for No Mythic, because we entered in 2 teams into the test last year. But one of the things that it really improved on was our design team, because we had a very new design team the last year. And so it really allowed for that leadership and that also learning how to use CAD. And throughout this year, we've had a very strong design team because of that. And so I think that's one of the areas for No Mythic that it's really helped into the season.
I agree with that. It gave us something real to actually work on in the fall. This year for Nightcrawler, it may have been the first year ever we had a CAD before we had a robot part. I think historically in the past, we would have some things in CAD first and other things we would go measure what would have been put on the robot and then CAD it after the fact. So the model was updated. I believe this year, everything was in CAD first. And that's also very exciting for our team. We solved a lot of problems quicker because we had a real model, a full blown accurate model. And honestly, I don't know that we could have made the intake we made had we not had the students as proficient as they were in CAD. One of our students spent over 40 hours a week for 2 weeks in CAD trying to get the geometries for the intake to work so that we could do that, what we call the baby bird, where we side load from the single loading station and we just slam that cone in the intake. To make that all work so that it could load from the single loading station, it would be inside the frame perimeter. It had the reach it needed to get that top pipe. It was a really tight package to get that all to work, but I don't know how we would have done that without CAD. And so I'm really excited about the competency we built this year with our design students in their CAD skills.
Yeah, and it also allowed us to, I know we've been raving about how good the test is for a while now. But I feel like that always happens when someone mentions that. But it allowed us to try a new way of thinking about strategy, which kind of goes back to the building within limits discussion we were having earlier, where one of the new ways we kind of thought about it was we basically we made like a list of all the tasks a robot could do. So a robot can, for example, in this year, it'd be a robot can drive, a robot can intake a cube, a robot can intake an upright cone, a robot can balance onto the charge station, a robot can balance an auto, all those different things. And then we ranked the priorities of how important each of them we thought would be to winning or getting picked. And so I think we kind of ranked them this year of driving's most important, balancing on the charge station would be, being able to be an alliance partner that makes balancing easy. Then I think we said auto balancing was the third most important thing. And then we said being able to intake cubes and upright cones. And then we kind of were like, so then where on this list, do we want to stop? Do we want to stop at, placing high cones, or do we want to stop at intaking tipped over cones, or, all of those different things. And so we ended up saying we wanted to stop at being able to do both cones and cubes low. But basically being able to lay out all of the options, right, in a list of, if I'm going to prioritize things, if we're going to prioritize things, what do we think is the most important? Like, for example, last year, I think that the most important thing in a robot might have been climbing over, being able to score high, because if you can climb to traversal and you can play defense for the rest of the match, you're going to get picked no matter what. And even if you can only climb mid or high and play defense for the rest of the match, that's probably going to get you picked over building a high goal robot or a low goal robot that isn't able to climb.
So I'd love to ask a follow-up question with that. And I'd love to kind of bounce this back to Lexi for a second, because there's two moments that I kind of see as being crux moments. One is you've made this list of all the things that a robot could do, and it's somewhere you're going to draw that line. I'm curious how your team draws that line. And if you have some people who are saying, we want to go for everything, and some people saying, nope, we're going to stop with this type of pickup. And the second is you've drawn that line, and now you're in a design meeting, and one person wants to do a robot like what you built, and someone else says, no, I want like a jack-in-the-box type robot that's like a pivoting, extending elevator, both of which are going to be viable ideas. How does your design team then decide which path to go down?
For us, I know that it took about 2 to 3 hours of long discussion for us to decide, where that line was for us. And we actually made diverging priority lists of, basically where we said if this was I think it was our fourth priority, because our first three priorities were drive, balance, auto balance. But then after that, I think we had like 2 diverging priority lists, where one was just be able to score high and not necessarily be able to score low. So I think we were thinking like a EveryBot kind of robot at that point, but this was before the EveryBot came out, of course. And then the other diverging path was, scoring, and then we discussed a lot the pros and cons of each and where we thought our limits would end up falling. And I think that knowing your limits is, in my opinion, probably the hardest part of the FRC design challenge, especially for more middle ranked and, lower teams that aren't necessarily, winning every regional, because there's definitely a constant struggle of, we want to build within our limits to have a successful season, but we also want to push our limits because pushing your limits is the only way to improve long term. And so where are our limits this year? Where do we think that we can have a successful season, but also do as much as we can?
Lexi, can you share, to Michael's question, can you share the whole process what we go through for the human robot simulation?
Yeah. So on the day of kickoff, everybody is invited. We usually are in, the auditorium or the IMC. We all watch the game reveal. We watch the field tour. And then students break up into sections and read what we deem the most important parts of the game manual. And those are usually the game specific parts, but we also usually, especially for our drivers, have breakdowns of, any of the other rules, team updates from that. So after, people have read the game manual and kind of like shared out with the group what is most important, then we open it up and we say, okay, everybody is dismissed to go home unless you want to stay for design team. And then design team will usually be there for another couple hours. And what they are doing is actually pretty similar to what Ian said, right? We're going through the video again. We're, figuring out all the different possible tasks. And what we did differently this year is, in previous years, how our human simulation had worked was, we ranked all the tasks by difficulty, and then, we would give students a certain allotment of points, and they could, like DIY their own robot and then human simulate it. What we did differently that worked a lot faster and a lot better this year was the design team put together what we called robot archetypes. And that means, using our task list, we identified where trade-offs were, so like, obviously you can't have a robot that does everything. So our robot archetypes are, they're probably going to have 2 things that they can do and, 2 things that they can't, something like that. And those kind of looked like, I'm a robot that can sit in the charge station and place everywhere. And I can hold, at the time, multiple game pieces was a viable strategy in the community. And so, I can hold multiple game pieces, I can place them everywhere, but I'm not very fast. So the idea is that I'll just sit in the community and place them, versus like, I'm a really fast, low level scorer. I can only do the hybrid zone. And so then when we did our human simulation, we tape out a gym floor. It's got all the different areas. Instead of students sitting down and putting together these individual robots, they broke into 2 alliances. So we had a red alliance team and a blue alliance team. And instead of building individual robots and then like kind of having a random mishmash of those together, they formed different alliance strategies. Maybe they're putting 2 high-scoring robots and a low-scoring robot, or, one that can sit and then 2 that go and gather, stuff like that. And what we gained from that was more of seeing what alliance strategies scored more points. And so then when we kind of talked about, what are our goals for competition this year? Where do we want to get to Worlds? Do you want to win your division at Worlds? We looked at the alliance strategies and the ones that were going to win the most points, and what robot of those, what robot archetype is, going to best fulfill that role. And so then, any design question was is it fitting this robot archetype? Is it, best achieving those goals? That kind of, do you have any questions on that? Does that make sense? Awesome.
Michael, one thing I want to call out on your question about somebody has an idea for an elevator, somebody has an idea for the arm. How do you decide which one you want to build? One thing that I think is important is also they ask the question of which one of those do you want to code? And I think a lot of times that gets left behind. I saw a Chief Delphi post, and I think it was an Open Alliance post where someone said, we've decided we're going to build a 3-pivot arm because it's the easiest to build compared to having 2 or 3 different types of mechanisms. And so we're going to build that. And my comment, sort of half tongue-in-cheek joking, was this was written by someone on the build team because that's not the easiest to code. And so knowing where the end of your arm is when you have 3 actuation points is a really hard thing to, how do we run this with a joystick? How do we know where the end of that thing is? It's a lot of math. It's a lot of geometry. It's tricky. So the design may be quicker to get done and quicker to get built, but that doesn't mean that your programmers have the skill or the aptitude to be able to build the thing that, or to be able to make the thing that you built actually work the way you hope it would work. I think a lot of people assume that code is magic and we can just make things work magically, but especially if you only get the robot for 3 or 4 days, the more complicated thing, the easier they look and build might make them a lot more complicated in controls. It's one of the reasons why we like using pistons, because it's about the simplest code you could possibly write. So that's also a question. We did have a couple of different prototype ideas this year for lifting things up in the air, especially as the mechanism that moves the cone or the cube from I'm holding on to it to I'm scoring it. And all of those got catted out. And so we catted all of those ideas out. Each student presented their idea. And then the design team talked about the pros and cons of all of those ideas. And then we decided which one we were going to prototype first. With the expectation that of the first one we prototype is the one we hope that works. But then if we find that there's a problem, then we're going to move on to design number 2 and prototype that one next. That was also something a little bit different we did this year with our process, is that because we were trying not to experience failure during build season, and we pushed them into the the test season, we were trying to get the design team to try to make the right pick first, or what they thought was the right pick first, and all in on that prototype, rather than having 2 or 3 teams working on prototypes in parallel. With the sort of the seniors and the mentors on the team having a better idea of which one was most likely to work, we tried to push them into finding that design and just going all in on that prototype to begin with.
Question about that. Because something you mentioned was catting out the different ideas, right? And I think for Nomythic, one of the things that we did this year, because we had a very long prototyping time. We probably spent 2.5 weeks prototyping, much longer than we would have liked. But something that happened there was that we had people that got attached to different ideas. So I guess my question then is, how advanced were those CAD those CAD designs, and how did you help avoid that aspect of people getting attached to those different designs and then feeling hurt when it's not that design chosen?
Well, I know as a team, we always have a meeting. It's the Tuesday, so we're about 9 days in, where that's when everyone presents their prototypes. And then as a team, we vote on it. And then the design leaders that we've picked for the students kind of finalize and pick which ones they really want to go with. And then that's how we kind of get through that. So, everybody gets a chance to present it and argue for it. And then the decision's made when we go forward.
Yeah, I think you kind of have to, I think it comes down to sort of the culture that you establish in your team too. I will share that for the programming team, we take every type of idea right from the first week of, we have an idea for an arm or an elevator, and we have kids write code for both. And we tell kids up front that half of your code is going to get thrown away. This is just the way this works. We want to have code to test as soon as something is built. We're going to learn something from it. So don't feel bad if you write code, you spend a week or two writing code for a mechanism, and then we don't end up using it, because that's the process. And it's not that uncommon in the industry either. And we try to help kids understand that, hey, this is just part of being a professional, is that we try ideas and we have to be okay that it's going to get thrown away. It doesn't always work. People do get emotionally attached to their ideas, and you might have some sour grapes at the end of the year of, well, if we would have gone with my idea, we wouldn't have had these problems. And those are just things that you're going to encounter and you have to run into. But I think we're upfront with kids right from the start that we're going to do things, when we do things in parallel, only one of them is going to be the final thing. And that's okay, because we've learned something and that was an expected outcome.
We went a different way this year on this on Talon. We decided this year we're going to not use pneumatics, which is different. And we fortunately have a strength in programming that we can solve those complex problems, which isn't always there. When you talk about the where is things in the, where's the wrist on the arm on that? We're fortunate we have programming that can handle that. We prototyped and we actually went in the wrong direction this year. And we learned that up in Duluth by then, that the choices we made just weren't going to really cut it. So then when we came back to design for 10,000K, we now knew to start all over again. And we had the fortune that we had built 2 frames. We always have this want or this goal of having a practice robot and a comp boat robot. And it seems like by the first tournament, they're both not working. Last year, in fact, we never even got to the comp robot, and we spent the whole year with our practice bot. This year, because we had 2 different frames with drives on them already, we could then make that turn after Duluth and say, okay, now we can really design, because we've learned what doesn't work. And we were fortunate enough to have a pretty robust design by 10,000K. But not to say that that was the best way to design. It's just, that's what happened this year.
Well, I kind of wanted to ask No Mythic how they felt about their design, because my understanding is you guys had a cutoff and you cut the designers off at a point, and then it became the programmer's robot, and that's as you went to Duluth with. How'd you guys think about that?
Yeah, so on No Mythic this year, we did have what we called sort of like our own sort of like bag day, just sort of honor that tradition. I think it was like February 11th or something. Is when we said we would get it. It is when we said we would get the robot to programmers build hands off. We didn't entirely follow that, because halfway through the season we realized that we were spending a lot more time on the build side than we would have liked. So we sort of morphed it to, and we wrote a post on Open Alliance about this, but we had our Duluth goals, which were like have a robot that can drive well, drive over the charge station, and can score low. And then we had our Minneapolis goals, which were, I think, like score cubes and cones in all the places, and like pick up from, I think we said the ground or something. Anyway, at the start of the season, we set these different goals. And so that sort of handoff day, we completed a robot that could like drive like we wanted it to, and and it had some sort of like simple plowing mechanism for game pieces. We got that off to programmers, learned some things didn't work exactly how we wanted it to. But then while that was happening, Build was then working on developing like an arm for the robot that we got on for 10K. So we ended up having a sort of hoop mechanism for the first competition to sort of honor those initial goals. And then that gave us more time to develop that arm. Yeah.
So just going back to goals, I think that's a really important part that we're kind of skipping over. Our goal is, as Nightcrawler, we want to get to state. To get to state, that means we have to have a very good robot for our first regional, which means we have to be working at our first regional. We also host a week 0, so that means we would like to be working at our own week 0, which means we have to hand it off to programming a week before week 0. So we've got a lot of goals that we'll backtrack, and if we can't work at week 0, then we're not going to be hitting that goal. So we need to draw lines in the sand. So that means all the way back to our design process, we have to say, what do we think can win at Duluth? Not what do we think can win at Champs, what can win at Duluth. And I think there's been, if you go way back to our 2013 robot, what we brought to Duluth was all right. It looked the exact same at Minnesota Champs, but we added a couple little tweaks here and there in programming, and we were one of the best robots in the world at state, which didn't help us at Worlds, but it's a different story. But we were able to get a very good working robot, and then we had weeks and weeks and weeks to iterate and practice. And that was huge. Our robots pretty much always look the same at Duluth that they do at state or Champs, but it's those little tweaks that we're able to keep making. So I would say if you can be cycling at week 4, 5, 6 and practicing, you're going to be great. It's just setting your really tight deadlines and cutting off and saying this needs to be handed over to controls and build or drivers, and going from there. There's like 60-45. I saw them running cycles week 4. That's crazy. They came out and they won their first regional because that's what they were doing. They had never been a team that had been amazing, and now they are amazing. So, I mean, No Mythic was running circles around everybody too. I think they had a chance to win Duluth just because their drivers looked great. And they were just a little low robot doing everything. Just get your drivers, get your programming team the robot. That's my best advice.
Like to that point, I think one thing that really helped us, and with No Mythic also, my name is Michael, is we rethought about the game. Instead of being in previous years, I think we've thought about it really as it's a build game. And at the last minute, we throw the robot to the programmers and the drivers. We really try to think of it as like a 30-30-30, that you got to build a robot, but you've got to program the robot. And then you've got to train your drivers in on how to use the robot. And I feel like that worked well for us. We just feel like we've been 2 weeks behind this whole season. But we've had a lot more fun with the competitions because when we show up at the competitions, like the programmers and the drivers have had a chance to settle into the robot in a way that we haven't in previous years.
One of the things I forgot to mention earlier is that as happy as I am with how things went this year, last year we had not started putting together our chassis until the beginning of week 4. We were so far behind last year, and it was a miracle that we had a robot to compete with, honestly. The build team pulled off a miracle getting that robot built as quickly as they did. We spent way too much time prototyping last year, which is kind of, I think that was the impetus for us to restructure our how we approach design this year and in the changes that we made. There's a question in the chat here on how do you introduce project management? I brought Scrum to Nightcrawler when I joined. I've been on the team 8 years now, and I think in my second year, I asked if I could introduce Scrum to the team, and we started doing Scrum then. And if you're not familiar with Scrum or Agile or Kanban or the multitude of different task-based project management solutions that are out there, there's some really good resources online. But really what it comes down to is you create Post-it notes, whether they're physical or virtual. You put them in a list. This is a backlog of things that we could do or should do. You can break your backlog up into sort of a wish list of would it be cool if, and this must absolutely get done, but it hasn't started yet. And then you've got sort of an in progress list and a maybe hand it over to controls if there's tasks that are related to that. for testing or tuning, and then done. And you move those tasks across the board every meeting. And, at some point, everybody just knows what has to get done, and you don't need that project management list to do things. There are points when people look at the board and they say, I need a job. And they're like, oh, nobody's programmed the vision stuff yet. I want to pick up writing code for the vision software, or no one's wired up the Limelight. I know how to do that. I'll go finding all the parts that we need to wire up the Limelight tonight. And so just identifying what all the tasks are is a good thing to do. I recommend for teams that have never done that before, if you have a place to safely keep a physical board, even if it's a trifold science board, which is how we started this thing, having a physical board where you pull a Post-it note off one column and you move it to another column, psychologically, that's very rewarding to physically move things. And it also is sort of this thing that's out all the time. So you walk past it, and you're constantly looking at the list. Once your team gets accustomed to that type of philosophy of moving things, then Monday.com is a great one. I know that was mentioned in the comments as well. We started with Trello. Trello was Monday.com didn't even exist as far as I know back then. So we started with using Trello as our Scrum board. And so managing those tasks is good. Lexi, can you share what you do with the calendar and how we define this calendar of target dates? Because I feel like that was a nice addition we made and has become really important to keeping us on task.
Yeah, just like the Google Calendar?
No, the big piece of paper where we write down panic mode at the end.
So that was also something that emerged out of test. And I think there is nothing that terrifies build students more than having to write a big X through each day on the build season calendar, and realizing that they really have to be realistic with their time estimates, because that's the other thing in Scrum is Emily, one of our previous captains, came back and did a Scrum presentation this year, which I loved absolutely. And one of the things she talked about was the fact that anything on your Scrum board is like a single task within itself. But what I think that sometimes lacks is the ability to know how long that's going to take. And so usually on your actual Scrum board, that task should be something that can kind of be done in the meeting. But in terms of the whole robot, finishing the chassis, building some sort of arm mechanism, the point at which you are going to hand it off to controls, students have to have a way that is easy to see when those things are happening. And so what we've done, either on one of the whiteboards that's up in our space or on the giant 3M Post-it note, and then we put it on the door of our shop, and we make a calendar, and it has anywhere from a month to the whole 6 weeks. And, at the end, we write usually our week 0, and it's part of the job of the design team and of the build captain and the controls captain to put down where things need to be finished, understanding what a realistic timeline is for putting things together. One of my favorite stories from test is we had 2 test teams, and, one of the returning students who was acting as a captain on them, he says, assemble, he was like, it was assemble or reassemble the chassis. And he said it should be 20 minutes to half an hour. And then that sub-team proceeded to disassemble and reassemble that chassis 9 times over the course of multiple weeks. And, we pick on him for it a little bit, but I think it's also, really important to give students that reminder of we have defined the tasks, but we also need to define how long they are going to take. And so that's something we've done with the calendar.
Yeah, and so on our calendar, it says ARM done this date, intake done this date, electronics board done this date. And then when we have our meetings, when students see that they're behind by 2 days, 3 days, a week, then the panic really starts to set in. And that can start setting in at week 3 rather than setting in at week 5.5. And so I think that was also really important. I think it was, again, I think last year when we didn't even have our chassis assembled at week 4, that really was the impetus for us to say we need to do a better job of our build process, because we can't be having 8-hour meetings 7 days a week in order to get things done because we got so far behind. So we started thinking about this idea of we need to help kids understand that we can't have 4 more days to prototype. We have to make a decision now, so because we have to meet our dates for these other things. But I think I think this calendar was a very positive addition to our designs process.
Yeah, a calendar sounds like a really good idea, especially because considering a lot of people on our team, myself included, struggle with how long things take. And the joke has now become you give us an estimated time and then you triple it. That's kind of what we've been running off of this year, but something we did this year to avoid that late set-in panic, which it still happened, but to a lesser extent. It was because we were building a second robot that wasn't, because we had a practice bot and then we were going to make it into a second robot, but then there was the snow day, so now we were building our entire comp bot 48 hours before we were heading up to Duluth, but that is a separate story. But we said that the bot was going, or the practice robot was going to be to code by at the end of week 3 of build season, because code team made that, our code team suggested that because we thought we'd get it by like hopefully week 4 if all things went well. But then somebody on the team suggested it should be a fun bet for people who wanted to participate, where people who wanted to participate on code team would dye their hair blue at Duluth if we got it within 3 weeks, and people on build would dye their hair blue if they didn't. So that's why my hair was dyed blue at Duluth. But in the end, we got it exactly at 3 weeks. And that was, game changing from a code's perspective and drive practice perspective. And we did not need all 3 weeks, but then, we were able to give it back to build for a bit of time to rework things. We were able to give it to our driver to do a bunch of drive practice. And it was our practice robot. So because we had, an entire practice robot and we were doing drive practice and coding on it, our build team was like, okay, so this part of the intake isn't working how we'd like it to. This part of our 4-bar could be optimized to be our, and so we, looked at all of the things from our practice robot that we want to improve. And so then we basically redid the entire robot for our comp robot, and redesigned it, and we were going to give ourselves the entire last week to do it. Then we lost 2 days of school for a snow day, and then we built the entire comp robot 48 hours before Duluth, which is always a fun little story.
I want to add one more thing to the calendar before we move on to this, because I think it's important. You always go backwards. So you say, here's our week 0. Code gets it a week early. So then that's your first cutoff is code. And then we typically do final wiring on the robot as the last thing before we hand it off to controls, so that everything's on the robot where it needs to go. Now we can organize our wires. And that usually takes 1, sometimes 2 meetings. So you go back 2 meetings to say, okay, wire the robot. That has to be done here. That has to be started here or done here. And then figure out what's the next thing that has to be done. Well, we got to get the elevator. We got to get the arm positioned on the elevator. Okay, that's probably going to take 2 or 3 meetings to work that out. So you put that down. Then you're like, how long is it going to take to build the elevator? How long is it going to take to mount the elevator? You start going back. And pretty soon, you just have to start having tasks done to start of week 3. And then students get really nervous about that. And that sense of urgency is really important to establish early. And I think that the calendar has done that for us. By pushing backwards, people start to realize they just feel like, oh, we have so much time. It's over a month away. And then when you start putting things on the calendar and you go backwards, then that changes that perspective.
Scott, sorry. I can't remember your exact quote, but you basically said, figure out what you can get done in half the amount of time you have and do that well. I like that quote. I don't
remember saying that, but thanks.
I just rewatched all these videos. You said it on one of these.
Oh, nice. Jeremiah, you have a question?
Yeah. So, will you say it serves as an advantage to have a practice? I mean, for a young team with low resources, I don't think we can afford to build like 2 competition like Robot One, but would it be something where to build a base that have a decent amount of weight on it, some contraption on it? Because I think one of the issue with my team was the drivers just didn't have enough time to practice anything whatsoever. And so our qualification matches were our practice matches. And like in Duluth, we really were busy fixing things that we could have broken at home and then fix that at home. And so those kind of things does it serve a purpose to have, because we have now 3 chassis now, we can use one of those and put some, weight on it, barbells and whatever we can do, just something to give it an elevation, nothing specific, but just to say, hey, get out there, try, be comfortable moving this around. Just that would be practice for the driver team until we can have a robot in their hands, hopefully going forward in time for them to be able to at least be able to be comfortable with it.
Yeah, coming from another small team that builds 2 robots anyway, but neither of them are practice robots. Having a chassis and getting some drive time, especially if you got new kids, just if you're doing like robot centric drive, like driving it backwards towards you, if you've never done that before, is quite difficult to get your mind around. Some of the kids that are have done it for a while, they've got the hang of it, but that's huge. Calendars, like Scott said, we've used them for a couple of years now, and that's important. But like for you, I'm sure as well as us, like we don't have a deadline to give it to our code team because we don't have a code team. Like, we don't have our build team is our driver.
Everyone is the same. That's the best part was like, our design team is our build team is it's kind of one of those things. But I think also this year, going into this year, I had the kids stop it. Sorry, I'm dealing with ghosts here. I had my kids. We had a build calendar, and we were doing so great until people started getting too comfortable, and then the weather kicked things into gear, and then we kind of fell apart. And most of my kids can drive, and so that was another factor that I had to deal with. And so I think the calendar is a really good thing. We tried it; it worked out way better for us to an extent, depending on the tasks that we had this year and how much we got accomplished. Our robot performed like the way we wanted it to. No, but I think going back and looking at it, because we came home, we tore the robot apart into pieces, and they're rebuilding it right now. And part of that is because we just didn't, we were just taking on too much, and we weren't also focusing on one thing here and there, and also just being able to just say, hey, this is our limit. These are our limitations. These are our strengths, and these are the things we can, use to our advantage and so forth. But having an organized list of here we are, this is where we should be, that also helped a lot. And I hope it helped a lot more because now the kids that I have coming back, a lot of them are coming back next year. A lot, many, or 7, 6 coming back, 1 graduating. And so they kind of have some, hey, we should do this next year. I said, I like that, and so, yeah, thank you all for pretty much addressing a lot of my questions to this, because this was really my question that I really wanted to hear your inputs on too. So thank you.
Jeremiah, having a second driving robot that is the same chassis that you'll be using for this season is like pure gold. So it doesn't have to be a duplicate robot that has all the same parts. Having it be approximately the same size, putting weights on it, like you said, and getting the programming team starting thinking about, hey, I think this is our goal. Our robot's going to do this. So our auto routines will have the robot do this, that, and the other. And then marking that out on a piece of carpet that's just big enough to run that routine and say, let's start writing that code. Having it to hook up your sensors and things you think you're going to need to control the robot, and getting data early from, hey, yeah, here's our encoder. It moves. Yes, we get data. Great. Because they said they're going to need an arm, or we're going to need that, or this, that, and the other. So hooking things up from a controls or a programming perspective, sensors, and driving the autonomous routine, getting the getting the basic drive code done early and then getting your driver's practice, even if it's just a box on wheels, is super important.
I was going to add getting into some of the off-season events in the fall is also a big thing, because like we're going to have a new driver next year. And it's probably going to be the kid that drove this off-season. He's probably going to drive this next off-season. So by the time he actually hits his first regional, he's going to have over 50 matches under his belt. So even if we don't get to a week 0, so getting to some off-season events is big too.
I have a question for the group about chassis. After I spent a lot of my season this year with the build team, where previously I was primarily working with programmers. And one of the things I observed is the kit of parts chassis at this point seems like it might be the most complicated chassis to put together. And I feel like we're not doing our rookie teams a service by telling them to use the KOP chassis. But again, that's me standing off to the side for the first year being part of the build season. Do we feel like we can do a better job of helping our rookie teams get a robot running quicker by advising them to use a different chassis, or am I just seeing something that's not there?
So our team decided to go back to using a kit chassis this year, and the last time we used it was in 2018. And so we were doing custom chassis. So in 2019 we did H drive, and then in 2020 and 2021 we did a 4 Falcon, and we used basically custom tubes that we CNC'd and cut. And so this year, because we were like, we're getting the robot done in 3 weeks, we're doing kit chassis. I think that it has pros and cons to it. It's definitely more of a challenge to mount things to it compared to just box tube. I'm not a build person. I'm going to put that disclaimer up front. I'm a code person who dabbles in I do a lot of design. I am not good with a wrench. Like it was a miracle. The swerve module that was assigned to me to assemble last Friday got done in a single lab hour. That's all I'm gonna say. Basically, we found that it's, in some ways it's easier because, it's what and you're familiar with it. Like we all did one over a test, it's at the same time, it's pretty, complicated to assemble. And if something goes wrong in the gearboxes or in the wheels, so like so we did a shifting gearbox drivetrain this year. And so if something went wrong, that was, our senior build people could probably fix it in an hour, but newer people would take an entire meeting. And so from a serviceability standpoint, we weren't a huge fan of the kit chassis. But I'm also, it was faster to assemble than us having to machine our own holes in tubing. I will say that. However, with the release of Max Tube from Rev Robotics, specifically, that is already compatible. You can get the ones with the pre-cut and everything. I think that it might be faster for rookie teams or basically any team that's not doing swerve, to use that as a chassis. And so I think it might. I have no experience with Rev Max Tube, but from looking at it, I think, and our experiences with the kit chassis this year, we felt that the kit chassis has both benefits, and it's also well documented, but it also has some downsides.
I feel like whatever chassis you go with is mission critical. And so you just have to make sure you get your team of chassis assemblers and get out the instructions, whether or not it's the KOP chassis with well-documented instructions or just the gearbox and whatnot, but you need to follow that to a T. you know, the takeaway is with the KOP, it's got side plates. You have, you know, it's you know, dead axle. If you make a mistake, you put a bearing in the wrong way, you get to take off the whole side panel and do it again. And then maybe that contributed to that 9 times when some of our students took it apart, is they didn't actually read the manual. They looked at the pictures, didn't read it.
You mean the bearings falling out part where they can't realize the bearings should go out, the flange part should be in between?
Yeah, which side the flange goes is important.
So I got speaking of the kit, though, I think for us, the kit seemed like a good idea, but I'm also hesitant with the KOP because, okay, so you know that whole default, that 40 part with the gearbox this season that came with the kit. Well, we ran our robot through because we pretty much were built upon our base before that message came out. And so we decided, well, let's run a few tests instead of just taking it apart because we were already running behind time. Fortunately, it didn't give out on us for competition, but when we came back home, took it apart, put it back together, try to roll it out. It would not go. The gear started binding. So I had the kids stick the gearboxes out, and we had one of those. Both of the gearboxes actually have the non-concentric shaft. And so now when you have to deal with that, kind of a disadvantage if you were an inexperienced team, is there any other kit, like a chassis kit, that is very efficient, that is not necessarily Andymark?
Yeah, I'd look towards the Rev stuff. We didn't use it this year, but I think they got kits that they sell, if I'm correct now, with that, whatever it's called.
Like the Versa?
Yeah, kind of like Versa does, I think, but I don't know. I'll pull up their website here, but I thought they had a base kit out with that new stuff that they're offering. But Versa, I mean, the nice thing about the kit of parts is because it comes in one big box and you have everything that you need. And if you want to build a West Coast Drive chassis from VexPro, you have to know a lot of different stuff. And there is hundreds of pieces that you have to order probably to get that working. And you have to
and that was the other thing I look at it. I'm like, this is what you have to know what you're doing, you know, efficiently to be able to. Because I went on their website and I was like, how many of this you need? I'm like, why are you telling me? And you said a kit. You should have it all. You know, I have the parts together. But anyway, sorry, Jesse, go ahead.
I mean, I'm going back and looking at the scouting data that I have on the kit apart chassis for Northern Lights and for 10K, and it looks like to me there were 4 or 5 that were in playoffs for sure. I mean, there were some pretty decent teams running kit aparts, I thought. So,
Lisa, you have a question?
Just a comment also about that kit of parts chassis. For our team, there's a perception that it's going to be the simplest, most straightforward way to go. You've got the instructions, it's tried and true. But at the same time, it takes us an amazing long time to put that together and re-put it together and convince them that you need to follow all the steps in order, things like that. And it just is actually not as simple as it appears. But at the same time, we're much more concerned about trying to design the superstructure. So to us, it feels really intimidating to have to add in building a chassis from scratch. And again, what parts do we need to have? Because we just don't have a template or a boilerplate to say, here's a parts list, here's the Versa channel, the 80/20, whatever it is we're going to make it out of, that I can cut to size however I want to do that. And here's how I can plant various possibilities for gearboxes, whatever, and protect them. So for us, it's that design element that's intimidating. And if we had something that would give us that boilerplate I would be delighted to do it. We've tried it a couple times and it's just been really wonky.
The other thing too is, Lisa, with my students too, we have this. I got kids who something come in a box and they would take everything and dump it out. And I had them going back before during our off season for this season. I bought them a kit apart and they did that. So, well, you're going to have to find other parts and put it into the different categories that they should be in. Look, you're going to have to match them up. And they had to take our kit apart and put it back together like 4 or 5 times. And so I was quite impressed with them this year that when our kit came in, it took them, and I know for some of you experienced teams, you're like, what? It took you that minute? It took them 3 days to get it built. Last year, it took them a month to get it built. So that was the big improvement, having them just go back and forth. I had one of my co-captains got so mad at me. It's like, why would you make us do this over and over? I was like, well, guess what? When you go to competition and something breaks, you'll be able to fix it right away. And it shouldn't have to take you, the same amount of time it took you in practice to get it built. So that was the one advantage I saw also about those kit apart. It's standard, and some of it is just you have to read direction. And I think some of the problem I saw with my students too, where they jump ahead of themselves. They see the picture like, no, read what it's saying, look at the parts label, and follow that direction they gave you. It's straightforward because I did it and I saw it, it worked, but I'm not going to build a kit apart for them. They have to build it themselves.
Our friendly timekeeper, Ken, has reminded us that we're at the end of our time. So does anyone have any final things they want to add about design before we wrap it up for tonight?
One thing. I think also on what we do at Nightcrawler is in doing our strategy and looking at how the game is played. I know as a mentor, I like to think in my mind, to see how fast, I try to estimate cycle times, try to think about how the top teams are going to be playing this game, and try to have that discussion with the students of how many cycles should we set as a goal. And when we get back to that goal setting of, how is this game going to be played at the top level? And then kind of work our way backwards and kind of establish metrics with those goals. So, being able to score on the high, okay, but how many times in a match do we want to do that? So in that goal setting, adding metrics to those goals so that we can then see if we need to continue to iterate throughout the season.
All right. Going once, going twice, final thoughts. All right. So our topic for next week was decided last week. We're going to talk about team culture. We're going to talk about how we establish team culture, how we communicate that to our new students. And we'll talk about what makes your team your team. Phoebe gave a great talk last week about how they won the Impact Award and how they talked about culture and how they talked about changing the culture. I really hope Phoebe's able to make the call next week and we talk more about that. Some teams have a great culture. Some teams' culture changes year to year depending on the teams that are on that team, and sometimes that works great and sometimes it has problems. So I hope that we can have a conversation about how you sort of establish that culture. I suspect we'll probably have conversations around core values. If anyone is using core values, I'd love to hear how you came about your core values and what that means to you and your team, things like that. Thinking out, typically we've been saying, what do we want to talk about next week? But we already know what next week's topic is. Does anyone have anything they want to kind of queue up for down the road? Ian, what do you got?
So Phoebe, Gabby, she was here last week, and I have been talking about we've been thinking about ways to improve first in Minnesota as a whole, rather than just on a team-to-team basis. There was a pretty long Chief Delphi thread that kind of got into the realm of discussing that. That was, popular, I think, last week that was made. And so I think that we were kind of talking about how when those threads kind of happen on Chief Delphi, coming up with actual things people could do kind of gets lost within the noise of, being an internet forum. And, how internet forums kind of, lead things to be, rather than, more productive things. So we were thinking that, especially Gabby Stetch and I, were thinking that possibly doing like a roundtable on like, and I think, for example, this roundtable is, one way that Minnesota First, is kind of improving itself in, because this is like almost a resource for all of the teams to, learn and grow from, which, improves everybody. But, thinking about ways Minnesota First as a whole can grow, expand, and improve ourselves.
I think that's a great topic. In fact, I mean, that's one of the reasons why we decided to start this call after that Swerve Drive. The first meeting we had was that Swerve Drive meeting, and it went so well. We thought, we should just keep doing this. So I love this topic. It's kind of a goal that I have with this call, and I think everyone on Nightcrawler shares that goal. So I think that's a great topic. Does anyone else have any other ideas that we want to kind of get on the list?
I was wondering if we want to talk about potentially increasing like commitment with team members and like kind of incorporating new members into like the flow of the team.
Paul, you're a little fuzzy on that. Can you say? I heard you say commitment, but I didn't hear the rest of it.
Sorry. I was just wondering if you could talk about commitment within team members.
Oh, how do you increase the commitment of your members? How do you get more people to show up at meetings, basically?
Yeah, exactly.
Let's put that into our culture talk for next week. I think that's a big part of what it means to be a part of the team and stuff. So let's make sure that we highlight things that get kids showing up to every meeting, and how do we improve that commitment. So I think that's a good thing to talk about, an important thing to talk about, what it means to be part of a team and how you improve that commitment. Excellent.
One thing that I was, now that some of us are still going in the season, but the season's ended for others, but summer events, it looks like the Gitch is back on. Like, for people that have gone to these off-season events, what you think about them, which ones are the best ones to go to, and how much it costs to get there, and the info if we have it. I know I've been to several and plan on doing a few this summer again, but
I think summer events is a good idea, especially like you said, as we're rolling into the end here. There's a lot of things that I'd like to do over the summer that have nothing to do with events that I think would be good for our students. It'd be good for our team culture. I really like to know what other teams are doing in the summer, if they're doing things in the summer at all. What kind of for us, it's a lot of outreach, but what kind of things are you doing as a team in the summer? I will also say back to this, how do you make Minnesota better? I am our section representative for the Coaches Association. So I've been trying to make contact with every single team in Section 4 in the hopes of trying to do stuff together. Because I really think that part of making Minnesota better is doing more things with the teams around us. You got to start locally, I suppose, before you can go out to the entire state. So I'm curious. I'm hopeful we can do some more things this summer with other teams, but part of that is knowing what is everybody else doing in the summer. All right, these are great topics. We'll have our conversation on team culture next week, and I look forward to seeing you all then. Thanks, everyone.
Good.
That's it for this week's FRC Roundtable. Join us live all season long, every Sunday night. Visit the website at team2052.com/roundtable to sign up for weekly invites. In the meantime, keep building, keep learning, and we'll see you next week.